There's a moment that happens quietly for a lot of people. It doesn't arrive with panic, it doesn't come with a dramatic realization, and it doesn't show up as fear. It shows up as a pause before saying yes, a pause before committing, a pause before imagining the future too far ahead. And what's interesting is that most people don't realize this pause isn't the problem. It's the signal. And once you understand what it's pointing to, everything else in this conversation starts to make sense. Life still looks fine from the outside. You're functioning, you're responsible, and you're doing what needs to be done. But something feels more deliberate than it used to. You notice yourself weighing decisions differently, thinking twice, holding back just a little bit more. Not because you're anxious, because you're aware that time feels different now, aware that flexibility matters more than it used to, aware that the margin of error doesn't feel as wide, and that awareness changes things. Not dramatically, subtly. It changes how you plan, how you commit, how much uncertainty you're willing to carry. Most people don't talk about this stage of life because it doesn't sound dramatic enough to explain, and it doesn't sound serious enough to complain about. It sits in that uncomfortable middle ground where nothing is wrong, but nothing feels completely settled either. You're still showing up, you're still doing your job, you're still handling your responsibilities. But beneath all of that, there's a quiet calculation happening. How long do I want to keep doing this the same way? What happens if something changes? What options would I actually have? People usually don't say out loud. They don't feel urgent. They don't feel catastrophic. They just feel present, and presence has weight. When you're younger, that feels generous. You assume there's plenty of time ahead, plenty of space to pivot later if you need to. Later feels open-ended when you're younger, but at some point, and it's different for everyone, that sense of openness shifts. Years stop stretching forward and start stacking behind you. And this is where most people assume something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong. What's happening is actually very normal. And once you see it clearly, you stop blaming yourself for feeling this way. You start realizing that choices feel heavier now. Not because they are irreversible, but because reversing them takes more energy. Mistakes feel more expensive, recovery feels a little slower, starting over feels less appealing, so you hesitate longer. And hesitation looks responsible on the surface. You plan more carefully, you spend more selectively, you conserve your energy from the outside. It looks wise. And in many ways it is. But here's a cost to constant caution. Because when caution becomes the default, possibility quietly exits the conversation. Not because you don't want more, but because you don't want disruption. You don't want chaos. You don't want risk that feels reckless. You want stability. And this is where things often get misunderstood. This stage of life isn't about wanting less. It's about wanting steadiness. You're not chasing excitement anymore. You're chasing confidence. And that confidence doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from knowing where your leverage actually is. That distinction matters more than most people realize, especially at this stage in our lives. Confidence means knowing that if something shifts, you won't be trapped. That if you need to adjust course, You actually can. That if life throws you a curveball, you won't be cornered by your own choices. That's not fear, that's discernment. And discernment is often mistaken for hesitation. Most advice aimed at people over 50 misses that completely. It focuses on discipline. Save more, spend less, be careful, stick to the plan. It's tidy advice, it's organized advice, but it doesn't address the real concerns that we have, because the concern isn't about self-control, it's about control over outcomes. It's about wanting to know that if something unexpected happens, you still have options. And if you've been feeling this quietly, not panicked, not desperate, just thoughtful, then stay with me, because this is where the conversation usually gets clearer, not louder. When that reassurance isn't there, people adapt instead. They plan smaller, they delay longer, and they make peace with less earlier than expected. Not because they're giving up, because familiar feels safer than the unknown, even when the unknown might actually offer more room to breathe. This is the moment many people stop thinking about the future with curiosity and start thinking about it with caution, not dread, just caution. And that shift changes everything, because once caution takes over, people stop looking for possibility. They start managing risk instead, and risk management is exhausting. It requires constant calculation, constant restraint, constant vigilance. It keeps life narrow. I see this so often. People who aren't unhappy, but they aren't settled either. They're capable, responsible, and dependable, but they're carrying more weight than they expected to at this stage in life. And that weight isn't just financial. It's the weight of knowing fewer things feel easily reversible now. When you're younger, mistakes feel temporary. Later, they feel more permanent. So people wait, and waiting feels safer than starting, even when starting is the only thing that would actually change everything. This is where many people get stuck. Not because they lack intelligence and not because they lack motivation, but because they don't see a path forward that feels grounded. Most paths they're shown feel extreme. Work harder for longer than you wanted to, gamble on something that doesn't feel solid, or accept a future that feels smaller than you had hoped for. None of those feel good. So people stay where they are. They tell themselves, oh, it's fine, that they're lucky compared to other people, that they should feel grateful. And gratitude, yeah, that matters, but gratitude doesn't replace agency. You can be thankful for what you have and still want more room to move. Those two things can exist together. What most people at this stage in life are actually seeking isn't wealth. Instead, it's steadiness. They want to know that if they need to pivot, that they can. That if priorities change, they won't be punished for it. That if something meaningful comes along, they won't have to overthink the cost for weeks on end. They want confidence, not excitement. And confidence doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from understanding structure. Because this stage of life isn't about working harder. It's about understanding structure. And once structure replaces effort, things stop feeling so tight. Most traditional advice assumes time is your greatest asset. But when time starts feeling heavier, that advice loses its power, because you're no longer trying to maximize decades. You're trying to protect quality. You want solutions that respect the life you already have, not ones that demand you rebuild everything from scratch. That's why so many people feel disconnected from conversations around money and opportunity. It either sounds too aggressive or too passive, too much hustle or too much restraint, very little in between. And when nothing feels quite right, people stop looking altogether. They assume there's nothing left to figure out. But that assumption isn't true. What is true is that the way the opportunity works has changed. And most people haven't been shown how, not clearly or calmly, or not without pressure. Opportunities today isn't just about effort, it's about positioning. It's about understanding how income is created now and where it can exist without consuming your life. Many people think earning differently means working more. But earning differently usually means working once in a way that continues to matter later on. And that's a different idea. And it takes time to land, especially if you've spent most of your life trading time for money. Time in, money out. That model trains you to believe effort and exhaustion are the exact same thing. So when someone suggests another way, it sounds unrealistic or irresponsible. But there is a distinction most people haven't been shown yet. The difference between income that depends on your presence and the income that depends on your understanding. Understanding compounds. Presence doesn't. And that's not a pitch, it's an observation. And once you see that distinction, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how many systems reward setup more than stamina, how many opportunities exist quietly behind the noise. This is where clarity matters more than motivation. Motivation fades, clarity stays. Clarity helps you decide what deserves your attention and what doesn't. And for people over 50, that shift is everything, because you don't want 10 new things to manage. You want one or two things that make sense and don't require you to constantly start over. This is often the moment people misjudge themselves. They assume discomfort means they're behind, but more often it means they're transitioning. Old assumptions no longer fit, but new ones aren't fully formed yet. That in-between space is uncomfortable for people because it lacks language. People know something needs to change, but they can't articulate what exactly that is. So they observe, they listen quietly, they research carefully. Not because they're passive, but because they're discerning. That discernment is a strength. It just doesn't feel like one while you're in it. This stage of life brings a different kind of leverage. You're more selective, less impulsive, better at seeing patterns. You're not trying to prove anything anymore. You're trying to protect your future self. And that changes what opportunity should feel like. It shouldn't feel frantic or trendy or exhausting. It should feel grounded. When people finally encounter something that respects that, they don't feel excited first, they feel relieved. Relief doesn't rush, it settles. And that's usually the moment someone stops asking, "Is this possible?" and starts asking, "How would this actually work?" That question restores agency. And agency is what most people are missing, not money. Money is a symptom. Agency is the root cause. When you have agency, You can adapt without panic. That's what creates confidence later on in life, not certainty, not capability. This is why earning differently matters today, not for status and not for lifestyle, but for flexibility. Flexibility buys peace of mind, and peace of mind is what people are really after. At this stage in life, success doesn't mean accumulating more. It means feeling less trapped. It means knowing that if something shifts, you won't be cornered. And the truth is, that kind of stability doesn't come from tightening your grip. It comes from expanding your base, from having something underneath you that doesn't disappear when you step back, that continues to exist when you're not pushing. That's the kind of income that people haven't been shown. Not because it's a secret, but because it doesn't fit the old narrative that we were taught when we were growing up. It doesn't sound exciting at first. It sounds quite sensible, and sensible rarely gets marketed well. But sensible is exactly what this stage of life calls for, because nothing else matters. There's something important to acknowledge. You're not behind. You're not too late. You're not broken. You're discerning. And discernment allows you to choose better, not faster. The conversations around money haven't landed for you, it's because they weren't designed for this stage of life. They were designed for accumulation, not alignment. And alignment sustains effort. When something fits, you don't have to force it. You simply continue. That's the kind of progress that lasts. If you're curious about how this works in a grounded way, there's a free blueprint linked below in the description. It's called the Freedom Formula Blueprint. This is not a pitch. It's not a map. If you want to be around others asking these same questions thoughtfully, there's a community that I've created there as well in the description below. You don't have to rush. You don't have to decide today. Just remember this. This stage of life isn't about shrinking and downsizing. It's about stabilizing so that you can move forward with confidence again. And that shift, that's where things really begin.